Good afternoon. Next item of business is a statement by Fergus Ewing on providing financial stability for Scotland's farmers and crofters. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions and interruptions. And I call on Fergus Ewing. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Presiding Officer, I am determined to do all I can to provide financial stability for Scotland's farmers and crofters, but the UK Government seems equally determined to make that impossible. For 3 years, I have pressed the UK Government relentlessly to deliver on the promises its Brexiteers made on future funding for farming and food production. The UK Government will continue to give farmers and the environment as much support, or perhaps even more, as they get now. That was what George Eustace, the UK Rural Affairs Minister, promised in May 2016. Yet all we have had is a letter from a UK Treasury Minister confirming that Scotland will receive £472 million to enable us to provide the 2019 CAP payments. And also a lecture about how the UK Government was shifting its policy on supporting farming to, and I quote, value for money for the taxpayer. That, Presiding Officer, is an insult to Scotland's farmers and crofters, and I have written to George Eustace urging him to dissociate himself with his colleagues' remarks. What it all signals is that far from a Brexit bonus, we face a Brexit boomerang, and I throw my reasonable requests out to the UK Government for financial clarity and certainty, and they throw them back at me with nothing in return. Any changes being made are unwelcome. We are moving from having 7 years of guaranteed funding from the EU and knowing what that funding envelope includes, to having to wait every year, each year, for the UK Government to say how much money will be received. Despite this, nonetheless, I will do my utmost to deliver as much certainty and stability for farmers and crofters as I can. That's also why I published in December the 2019 CAP payment strategy, setting out when payments would be made for each of our Pillar 1 and 2 schemes to our customers. I'm confident that we will meet the targets in this strategy, which builds on a solid track record in recent years of addressing the issues in the CAP IT payment system and getting funding to farmers and crofters and land managers as promptly as possible. Presiding Officer, that IT system is now working and it's stable. And last year, all the payment targets were either met or exceeded. We have now made £409 million of basic greening and young farmer payments to 18. There are fewer payments left to be made than in previous years in what's called the tail. Nonetheless, I've asked for those final 23 complex and highly technical claims for the 2018 year to be prioritised as a matter of urgency. We have also made £46 million of coupled support payments, and we are still the only part of the UK to provide this extra support directly to farmers and crofters. In the Pillar 2 scheme, we've paid out £3.5 million in forestry grants, enabling Scotland to exceed its tree planting target. And we've paid out £19.5 million in AICS and £63.3 million in LFAS. Again, until recently, we were the only part of the UK to provide additional support to those farming on the most marginal land. Presiding Officer, you recall that it had been the UK Government's reckless intention to leave the EU last October with or without a deal in place. I was not prepared to allow that to happen without providing Scotland's farmers and crofters with as much financial stability as possible. The Government therefore put in place a national loan scheme, giving eligible farmers and crofters 95% of their basic entitlement at the earliest point ever under this CAP. Throughout the scheme, £334 million was paid out in October to 13,837 claimants, and this was about 2 months earlier than any other part of the UK. In addition to the basic payment loan scheme in December 2019, we launched the LFAS loan scheme, and to date, we paid out £38.2 million to 7,595 claimants. Combined, the two loan schemes have so far paid out £378 million to these claimants. The objective has been putting money into farmers and crofters' hands, where it belongs, when they were having to deal with Brexit uncertainty created by the UK Government. This represents 69% of the total £550 million due to be paid out by around June this year. The remaining top-up basic greening and young farmer payments will start reaching bank accounts in early February. Those who did not take up the offer of a loan and who are therefore waiting for all of their 2019 cap payments will be prioritised. Payments in the Pillar 2 schemes will begin in early April. Moreover, we will continue to improve the efficiency of the whole payment system by seeking to move further to a fully digital application process. We will provide practical support through our area office staff to those around the remaining 9% of applicants who still submit on paper to change to online. We'll contact those applicants and we will offer them one-to-one sessions with staff who have a wealth of experience in this work. We know that that approach is likely to be efficacious. Presiding Officer, these are not the only payments that our farmers and crofters will receive this year. After years of campaigning led by the Scottish Government and supported by this Parliament and by key stakeholder organisations, the UK Government finally agreed to right the historic wrong of keeping back the EU convergence money. As a result, Scotland will now receive historic funding of £160 million, and I've already advised Parliament of my intention to split that between this financial year and next financial year. Presiding Officer, I previously advised Parliament that this would be in 2 equal payments of £80 million. Since then, I've engaged with stakeholders, including the Scottish Crofting Federation and the Scottish Tenant Farmers Association, to hear their concerns about the need to ensure more of this funding reach those farming in the most marginal areas. Accordingly, I announced a further package of measures for farmers and crofters. It includes redistributing an additional £10 million in 2019-20 to those in the most challenging areas to be drawn down from the second tranche of convergence funding. And I can advise today that this funding will be allocated to those who need it most, farmers and crofters in Regions 2 and 3, as explained in the handout that I have provided to members accompanying this statement. The split of the £10 million will be weighted to Region 3, with 70% of the funding going to that region and 30% being allocated to Region 2. There will be no change to the voluntary coupled support component, which will be retained at £15 million as per my previous announcement. This funding will be paid by the end of March this year, in addition to scheduled Pillar 1 payments. I want to be sure that the level of payments received by individuals strikes the right balance between preventing excessive payments while ensuring an appropriate level of support to larger, more productive businesses. I can therefore confirm that a cap of £55,000 will be placed on the basic payment element of this funding. This will be the maximum that any business or individual farm can receive thereunder. And while there are no conditions and no specification on what this funding can be used for, I would encourage farmers and crofters to consider how best they might apply it. We are all aware of the climate emergency and the need for all sectors, including agriculture, to do more to cut their emissions. There's a lot farmers and crofters can do in this space to lower their footprint and improve their efficiency and productivity. But we should also acknowledge what they already do and also what this government is already supporting. Through the greening, through AICS, through beef efficiency scheme, through the forestry grant schemes, approximately a third of current funding is tied to reducing the impact of the sector on the climate or improving biodiversity. Unlike the UK Government, the Scottish Government considers that our farmers and crofters already do deliver value for money for the taxpayer. And that is why we are committing today to provide farmers and crofters £640 million in total support in this CAP payment year. That is what this government delivers for Scotland's rural economy. Through our payment strategy for 2019 and by our actions, it is this government which is providing Scotland's farmers and crofters with certainty, with clarity, and above all else, Presiding Officer, with financial stability.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. I have around 20 minutes in hand for this. I ask those members who want to ask questions to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on Peter Chapman. Mr. Chapman.
I thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I need to declare an interest in this as a partner in the farming business, and I need to apologise for arriving slightly late. And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for prior sight of his statement. And I think it is pretty rich for the Cabinet Secretary to criticise the Westminster Government in his statement The truth is, for 3 years this SNP government has done all in its powers to make a Brexit deal impossible. And far from giving Scottish agriculture any certainty of future payment plans, this SNP government has only tried to increase grief, grievance and division between this place and Westminster for political point scoring. The Minister has wasted 3 years when he should have been planning to implement a system of support tailor-made to the needs of Scottish agriculture. Presiding Officer, this is the big prize that Brexit offers, and we still await any idea what he thinks is going to happen going forward. The Cabinet Secretary boasts about making payments on time. However, he can still only deliver payments on time with loan schemes, because the expensive IT system still does not work properly 5 years on, despite his claims to the contrary. And in the recent past, this IT system was an unmitigated disaster and had farmers in despair. This year, the Cabinet Secretary used 14 million...
I think I better warn you, you're almost out of your 1 minute. You are at 1 minute 30 seconds, and I haven't heard a question, so you better ask it right now.
Yes, indeed. Does the Cabinet Secretary intend to use 42 million of the remaining 70 million of convergence funding to fill the shortfall in LFAS payments next year, bearing in mind this shortfall should be funded from the Scottish Government budget?
Thank you very much. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, where does one begin? Let me just answer the question, which is a duty, and let me say that I'm delighted that we were able, because finally the UK government acknowledged the error of their ways, that they committed what they admit was an historic injustice of wrongly withholding from Scotland's farmers and crofters 160 million, and they did it for 6 years. I mean, if I hold on to property that belongs to someone else for 6 years, I probably wouldn't be here. I would be in Barlinnie. But that's what they did. And for them now to take this haughty attitude beggars belief. Secondly, we did pay money to our farmers and crofters this year through the Basic Payment Loan Scheme around 2 months earlier than the rest of the UK. And although called loans, they are de facto advance payments. And I can tell you this, and I think Mr. Chapman actually knows this, that these payments were very much appreciated by farmers who were desperately worried about Brexit. And thirdly, there is no Brexit deal on farming. We do not know if there is going to be a trade deal. Some say there will, including Theresa Villiers, whom I met last Monday. Most people think that that's incredibly optimistic. If there is not, then there will be tax on exports to the EU countries, of which we will no longer be one in a few days' time, on sheep meat of 40 or 50%. And there may be, at the same time, no equivalence ensuring that meat imported to the UK from countries in the Americas, for example, meet the high standards here, thereby undermining our whole sector. It is simply not possible to finalise any system of support for farmers and crofters in Scotland or elsewhere in the UK until these huge uncertainties are resolved. And every farmer I've spoken to, Presiding Officer, is concerned about that. What a shame the Scottish Tories just don't like good news. They're desperate for bad news. And when good news comes along, they just flounder around. They don't really know what to do.
Colin Smith.
Presiding Officer, and thank you to the Cabinet Secretary for advancing of his statement. Presiding Officer, let's be clear why we're here today. When the Cabinet Secretary made his announcement of the allocation of the first 80 million tranche of EU conversion funding, he got it wrong. He didn't listen to warnings and calls that this should not be the source of funding to plug the LFAS gap. The backlash against that decision forced him into his hurriedly arranged announcement of a further 10 million of support to farmers and crofters. But there was no detail. It was a figure plucked out of the air to placate criticism. Today, we have that detail, which I welcome. But it does remain the case that using 10 million of funding from next year leaves just 70 million. If he continues to use this as a source of funding to plug the LFAS gap, that will take a further 42 million. So why can't the Cabinet Secretary rule out here and now raiding this fund yet again to cover up the fact that when he made his commitment on the LFAS, he did not have the budget to deliver it, and he needs to find that budget from elsewhere?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it's a matter of fact that I made it absolutely clear. For example, when I met the LFAS committee of the NAFUS, and I believe the time of the meeting was around the early part of last year, I said that my pledge was to prevent a diminution in the real income of farmers in the most challenging areas through the Alfast scheme. And I would seek to do that by winning the convergence campaign or by finding another solution. Now, we won the convergence campaign, and therefore I've entirely delivered the promise that I made. That is accepted, I believe, by those who were present at that meeting, and I've made that clear absolutely subsequently. Now, Mr. Smith says that we didn't know what we were doing when we made the announcement. I'm afraid that he's wrong about that. In fact, there were most substantial modelling carried out by my officials. In fact, overall, I think there were 33 different schemes modelled. So I'm afraid, you know, the glib assertion made without actually checking any facts that we somehow made this original... Well, I'm trying to answer his question, but he's barracking me. I don't mind. We did detailed calculations. However, it was plain from the reaction that we had that we didn't get it quite right. I admitted that. I responded. I met with the SCF. I'd already met with the NFUS. And we put forward alternative proposals. And my belief, Presiding Officer, is that that improvement has been welcomed by the majority of people. Of course, I appreciate that not everyone will be happy, and I know that that's an aim that, frankly, is not one that can realistically be achieved. But I do think the announcement today, with the placing of the cap at the right level, something neither front bench have mentioned, and indeed with the increases, the very substantial increases to the Region 2 and Region 3 components of the payments, will be broadly welcomed. And moreover, and this is the last thing I'll say, I wanted to make sure that this money was paid out in 2 tranches, the first tranche before the end of this financial year. We were only in a position to start this work around October of last year. To do that, and to come up with a scheme, to devise it, to discuss it, to agree it, to implement it by the end of March this year, is a great achievement. I'm profoundly grateful to my officials for their excellent work in enabling our farmers and crofters to receive this money by the end of March this year.
Now, I have 9 members wishing to ask questions. I have about 13 minutes. Could I have succinct questions, please, and if possible, succinct answers? Maureen Watt, followed by Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my sorrow and anger that we're being forced to leave the EU next week, and as a consequence our farmers or crofters are no better off and could actually be worse off, not least because of the loss of free trade and migrant labour, with no certainty about what will replace the benefits of EU membership?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, yes, I do, and the Scottish Government has consistently underlined to the UK Government that leaving the single market and the customs union will cause significant disruption to trade in animals and plants, in food and drink products, and agricultural inputs such as seeds, pesticides and fertilisers as a result of tariffs and non-tariff barriers and disruption to existing trade routes. So we've been clear that the availability of skilled and unskilled labour from an EU-wide pool is absolutely essential for our agri-food businesses and producers. The First Minister made clear again this week just how much we value and appreciate our fellow EU citizens who have chosen to make their home here, and the Scottish Government will have more to say about this in the near future, about immigration policy and the need for a tailored solution in Scotland.
Thank you. Edward Mountain, followed by Stuart Stevens.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too would like to make a declaration in that I'm a member of a farming business. This statement is all about distributing monies and gives no ideas for the future, nor does the Cabinet Secretary's Agriculture Bill. When it comes to the future, does the Cabinet Secretary have any ideas of his own?
Cabinet Secretary.
This statement is about the financial payments, and it's to provide an update. And it's, I mean, I don't know whether Mr. Mountain thinks that's unimportant, but if he does, he's entirely wrong about that. It's absolutely essential for farmers and crofters operating in many cases as businesses, very, very substantial businesses, have clarity about when they receive funds. Mr. Mountain, I believe, is or was in business, and so are some of his colleagues. They should understand that better than they appear to. It's absolutely essential that we deliver information about when they are going to receive the funds to which they're entitled. And for the Tories to poo-poo that, I think really is a failed strategy on their part. Of course, we are working hard on developing future options, and Mr Mountain has completely ignored the fact that we published in the June 18 our Stability and Simplicity document that set out a very clear path to our farmers and crofters. And finally, Presiding Officer, the UK Government, their plans, or so-called plans, were excoriated by the National Audit Office. Their ELMS plan was ripped to shreds. Look at the National Audit Office report last June and be worried about the future of payments in England.
Can I say to members, if you're not happy about your answers, don't barrack from the sidelines, please. I have to hear what's being said. Stuart Stevenson, followed by Claudia Beamish.
I declare a share in a very small registered agricultural holding. Can the Cabinet Secretary update us with what will now happen following the Bew review that recommended an additional 51 million in funding?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance has received confirmation from the Treasury that half the money, 25.7 million recommended by View, would be paid in 2 equal parts in financial years 2020 to 21 and 2021-22. What we don't have from the UK Government is a clear statement on future funding for all aspects covered by the EU, and that is something in which we are obviously pressing.
Claudia Beamish, followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The statement highlights the need for agriculture to cut emissions. Will the Cabinet Secretary join me in welcoming the recent WWF report delivering on net zero and today's Committee on Climate Change report on land use, and how they set out a range of measures which allow agriculture to drastically cut emissions? And will he commit today to assessing...
Stop right there just a wee minute. I may be missing this. I'm happy to be corrected. What's this got to do with this statement?
It's in the statement,
right, I've been corrected. Go for it.
That's why I said it highlights the need for agriculture to cut emissions. And will he commit today to assessing the contribution that the recommendations of these reports make on the way forward for a sustainable farming and land use structure in Scotland?
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I acknowledge that both the IPCC and the WWF reports make an important contribution to debate. I've noted some of the recommendations in WWF. I hope to meet with them shortly to discuss this. I hope that arrangements for that in hand, or they will shortly. I met on Monday with Chris Stark of the IPCC, and we had cordial discussions. We recognise that we need to do more to cut emissions. We have clear statutory targets. We will, of course, address that. But I do think we should acknowledge the good work that farmers and crofters do. I think sometimes, presiding officers, many of them feel a bit beleaguered that the good things they do haven't been sufficiently recognised. And some of the things they do, the maintenance of permanent grassland, their contribution to biodiversity, are things that I hope we can all acknowledge and recognise as public goods, as good things that they do. But they do need to do more, and we are working, and we'll be working very shortly, on measures about how we turn that into a series of measures which I hope the vast majority of farmers will adopt and accept.
John Finney, followed by David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In a similar vein, thanks for the recite of the statement. I'm sure that crofters and farmers will welcome this money, Cabinet Secretary. You mentioned the climate emergency, but you also say, and I quote here, there are no conditions and no specification on what this funding can be used for. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how the Scottish Government will assess the impact of these monies in addressing emission cuts, please?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it is for farmers and crofters to assess how they use their funds. I do think it is sensible that they consider investment, using the money for investing in what they do, and we believe that there's a strong case that the Farm Advisory Service can provide useful advice on that. But we do accept, as I said in the answer to the last questioner, that we do obviously need to ensure that our climate change commitments are met. And we are looking extremely carefully about what more farmers can do. I think I did say, and I'll finish with this, my statement, that around about 1/3 of the current money that's paid out, Mr Finney, under the CAP directly to farmers contributes directly to the environment, and some of it climate change, and some of it indirectly contributes as well. And I think that that is understood in this chamber, and I hope we can build on that over the coming months.
David Torrance, followed by Mike Rumble.
I welcome the news that the Belfast loan payments have begun. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise whether there is still time for individuals to apply for a loan payment?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I can, and I'm glad that Mr Torrance has raised that, because I would make this plea if LFAS recipients, those entitled to LFAS, have not yet returned the loan offer document, please do so as quickly as possible. If you've lost it or you can't find it, let us know, let the ARPID office know, they'll get a duplicate out to you. We want to pay you the money that you're entitled, but we do need the signed offer of loan acceptance by you. So this is a plea that as soon as we get the remaining ones, we will get on with the job of paying out the remainder.
Mike Rumbles, followed by Alistair Allen.
Just 2 months ago, Mr Gove and Mr Jack, during a well-publicised farm visit to Castle Douglas, announced that the UK government was committing the same level of farm support to Scottish farmers every year until 2024. Is the Cabinet Secretary saying to Parliament now that the Scottish Government has to date received no such undertaking, no such firm commitment in writing for farm support to 2024 from the UK Government? Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I can tell Mr Rumbles that we have not received such an assurance in writing. I know that these statements have been made in the newspapers, but with respect, governments cannot govern on the basis of what is printed in the newspapers. We can only act once we have copper-plate, unequivocal assurances in writing, and those must be provided to the Finance Secretary. Now, we have got a letter here, and it does say that the intention is to make payments in future for future years, and it does state what the payment will be in this year. It doesn't mention the BU money, incidentally, and it doesn't mention confirmation about technical matters, including the exchange rate for currency, the rate applicable for currency exchange rate and how that is dealt with. But most important, and it says, and I'll just read it out actually, it says, the decision on funding for 2021 should not be taken as a precedent for these spending review decisions. In other words, the payment for this year should not be taken as a precedent for the next years. Now, if you got such a letter, Mr Rumble, sorry, if anyone here got such a letter that says you can't be sure that the figure this year will be met next year, would you take that as an assurance, or would you take that as, goodness me, I'm pretty worried about what I'm going to get next year? So, I've written back to Mr Eustace on the 17th of January seeking confirmation, and I very much hope, well, the Tories are shaking their heads, but I mean, I'm just reading out what they've said. This is what they've said here, and it is not an assurance in writing. So when are they going to get around to it? And the last point I make is that the EU plan things on a 7-year basis, and farming is a long-term business. So under the EU, which they apparently now hate, although most of them used to support it, we knew where we were, and farmers knew where they were, for 7 years. Now we don't know where we are after 12 months. That, they think, is good news. We don't.
I'll try to take the 2 last questions with a brief. Alistair Allen, followed by Donald Cameron.
I welcome the fact that the Cabinet Secretary acted on the concerns expressed by crofters and that he is now allocating all of the £10 million to those in Region 2 and 3 land. Can he explain further what impact this will have on those payments and when he will be able to set out his plans for the Year 2 tranche due in the next financial year?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, in thanking the member for his comments, I would also thank those crofters whom I met in his constituency in, I believe, October for a very, very useful exchange. Since then, and in the statement, we've made clear that in relation to the alterations since the original statement, the Region 3 payment rate has increased by 92% from the original rate, and Region 2 sees an increase in 65%. And this ensures that a significant proportion of the support is directed to those farming in our marginal and remote areas. And I very much hope that these changes, which I've explained and alluded to earlier, will be welcomed by the vast majority.
And Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I refer to farming and crofting in my register of interests? The Cabinet Secretary's statement refers to the payment being made by the end of March 2020. Can he be any more specific than that, given that many farmers and crofters in the Highlands and Islands will rely on this funding and given that it's at an important time of year for them, with lambing beginning, etc.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think I've been as specific as it's wise to be at this stage. It's not so very long until the end of March. We're now nearly at the end of January. The important thing is to ensure that the scheme is administered successfully. All previous loan schemes have. I take the point that Mr Cameron makes. It's a perfectly fair and valid one, but I think I will stick with the assurance that I've made, and obviously in the interest of clarity, that businesses will know, following this statement today, that they will receive a convergence payment where they're entitled to receive it by the end of March. I've also indicated the payment schedule for basic payments and the other payments, and I hope all of this information will be of use and will be of help and will be appreciated by our farmers and crofters throughout Scotland.